Isn't it amazing how even the simplest things can hide a whole world of complexity when you start to look closely?
Oh, absolutely.
Think about, a farm you drive past, or maybe even that jar of pickles bubbling away in your pantry.
Yeah.
Beneath the surface, there's just this constant buzz of interaction.
Yeah,
And that's exactly where we're headed today for a brand new deep dive.
absolutely. We're going to peel back the layers on some really fascinating topics today. We'll explore how different farming methods impact the land,
Right.
delve into the dynamic world of microbes in fermented foods,
Mm.
and even uncover some secrets to successful teamwork in these areas. It sounds like a lot, but it connects.
Yeah, to help us on this journey, we've gathered a really diverse set of sources. We've got
Yeah.
scientific studies looking at conservation agriculture. It's a way of farming that really minimizes soil disturbance.
Mm-hmm.
A fascinating exploration of how microbes evolve in fermented foods.
Which is super interesting.
Totally. An article offering advice on resolving disagreements on farms, research on integrated crop management, which is all about smart, tailored farming, and even a big picture look at what makes collaborations for sustainable agriculture really work across Europe.
Yeah, it might sound like a bit of a mix, but these seemingly different areas are, well, surprisingly connected.
So what's the mission today?
Our goal today is really to pull out the most important nuggets of information from these sources. We want to understand how different approaches to agriculture affect the delicate balance of the farming ecosystem, everything from the soil life to the plants and animals.
Okay.
We also want to unravel the constant activity within those microbial communities that give us those delicious fermented flavors.
Right, the hidden world.
Exactly. And finally, we're aiming to identify some core principles that make collaborations in these fields actually thrive. We're hoping to spark some connections you might not have considered before.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with conservation agriculture. This is a set of farming practices that really prioritizes keeping the soil undisturbed, leaving more of the previous crop on the surface, and growing a wider variety of plants. It's kind of a move away from traditional deep plowing, which, we're learning can have some downsides, like losing carbon from the soil.
Exactly. Think about how in conventional farming you often see a lot of plowing, a lot of turning of the soil.
Yeah, the classic image.
Right. Now imagine conservation agriculture, or CA, where the focus is on reducing or even, eliminating that tilling. This fundamental difference in how the soil is managed has a kind of cascading effect on the entire agricultural environment.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, I think. This reduced soil disturbance in conservation agriculture leads to the creation of more stable mini habitats.
Right.
Because the soil isn't constantly being mixed up, the homes for tiny soil organisms stay more intact. Plus, the leftover crop material on the surface acts like a protective layer.
Like a blanket.
Exactly, like a blanket, helping to keep moisture in and temperatures more steady. And this can really boost beneficial biological activity.
And what's fascinating here is that this shift can have a complex impact on insect pests, the ones that can damage crops and their natural enemies.
Ah, the good bugs and the bad bugs.
Kind of, yeah. These are the beneficial insects that prey on or parasitize the pest insects, helping to keep their populations in check. On the one hand, these undisturbed environments and the layer of plant residue can offer shelter and good conditions for a range of insects, including some pests.
Okay, so maybe more hiding spots for the pests.
Potentially, but on the other hand, it can also create better conditions for those helpful predators and parasitoids, better hunting grounds maybe.
So it's not as simple as saying conservation agriculture just gets rid of pests then.
No, not at all. A big review, I think it looked at 51 different types of insect pests around the world.
Wow.
Yeah, it actually found that when farmers reduced tillage, it led to less damage in 43% of cases.
Okay, that's good.
But it actually increased damage in 28% of cases and didn't make much difference in the remaining 29%.
Huh. So it's a really mixed picture.
It is.
So the big takeaway here isn't that conservation agriculture always reduces pests. It's far more nuanced, isn't it? A delicate balancing act where changes in farming practices create a ripple effect, sometimes favoring pests and sometimes their predators.
Precisely. And we even have specific examples of this happening in the real world. In the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which is a huge agricultural region in South Asia,
Right.
some farms using conservation agriculture have actually seen more problems with pests, like the mealybug in rice and the oriental armyworm in wheat.
Oof. Okay, so these are concrete examples of how changing our farming methods can sometimes lead to, well, unexpected challenges.
Exactly. You solve one problem, maybe create another subtle one.
But it's not all doom and gloom on the pest front with CA, right? Because the research also suggests that when conservation agriculture involves growing a more diverse range of plants.
Ah, yes, diversification.
Things like planting different crops together, or maybe growing cover crops in between main crops that can create a more complex environment overall.
That's a crucial point. This complexity can offer those natural predators more places to live, more things to eat, better hunting grounds, potentially helping to keep those pest numbers down naturally.
So more biodiversity on the farm acts like a buffer.
In a way, yes. Increasing the biodiversity within the farm can act as a natural form of pest control. By creating a more varied habitat, you're essentially making it harder for any single pest species to really take over and dominate.
Okay, shifting gears completely now, let's shrink down and explore the amazing microscopic world of spontaneous fermented food.
Agrees. Yes.
Think about your sourdough starter bubbling away, maybe a fizzy kombucha, or even traditional cheeses. These are turning out to be surprisingly valuable for understanding something called eco-evolutionary dynamics.
That's right. And what's fascinating here is that these fermented foods offer a unique opportunity for scientific study. They have the natural complexity of a real-world microbial community, lots of different types of bacteria and yeasts interacting.
Right, it's not sterile.
Not at all. But they're also somewhat contained, which makes it easier, relatively speaking, to observe and even manipulate them in a lab setting.
So what exactly are eco-evolutionary dynamics? It sounds pretty complex.
Okay, let's break it down. Essentially, it's the idea that how different species in a community interact with each other and their surroundings. That's the eco or ecological part.
Yeah.
And how these species change genetically over time. That's the evolutionary part.
Okay.
Can happen quite rapidly, like on contemporary timescales, even within just a few generations for microbes.
Wow, fast evolution.
Yeah. And these quick interactions and changes can really shape the variety of life, the biodiversity within the entire ecosystem, like inside that fermentation jar.
And why are our jars of fermented goodies such a great place to study this rapid interplay?
Well, several reasons. First, as we said, they naturally contain a diverse range of microorganisms, often with a long history of human interaction and study, especially things like lactic acid bacteria. You know, the bacteria that give yogurt and many other fermented foods their characteristic tang.
Sure, the workhorses.
Exactly. Second, with all the advancements in DNA sequencing and other high-tech analysis, we can now examine the diversity within these communities in incredible detail.
Like reading your blueprints.
Pretty much. This allows us to test ideas about how ecosystems work in a relatively controlled, yet still complex, real-world environment.
So what kind of eco-evolutionary questions are scientists actually trying to answer using, say, kimchi or kefir?
Oh, a whole range of things. They're looking at how the numbers of different microbial species change in different parts of a fermentation and over time.
Like who's winning the race?
Kind of, yeah. And what's the relationship between having a lot of different species present high diversity and how stable the fermentation process is? Does more diversity mean it's less likely to go wrong?
That's a big question in ecology generally, isn't it?
It is. They're also digging into the idea of niche space, how different microbes carve out their specific roles based on the resources available to them, like different sugars or temperatures.
Finding their specialty.
Exactly. And finally, they're exploring what happens when different microbial communities come into contact and mix something called community coalescence.
Okay, let's zoom in on some of these. You mentioned patterns of diversity. What's the key takeaway there? What shapes who lives in the jar?
Well, what's fascinating here is how even subtle differences in the environment or, the way a fermented food is made in different regions can lead to really distinct microbial communities.
Like a fingerprint.
Sort of, yeah. For instance, studies on baker's yeast have shown that slight variations in, say, feeding schedules or temperature can really influence which specific microbes thrive. And it often seems that more traditional, less industrial methods of fermentation result in a greater variety of microbes overall.
More handcrafted means more diverse, maybe?
It often looks that way. It's almost like the microbial world has its own version of terroir, reflecting its unique origins and handling.
Interesting. So it's like different microbes have different preferences, different needs. What about niche space? That sounds important for how different microbes can manage to live together.
It is. The core idea here is the niche exclusion principle, which basically says that only one type of organism can perfectly fill a specific role or niche in an environment if resources are limited.
Only one winner.
In theory. for that exact niche. But in reality, a role or niche is defined by lots of different factors: nutrients, space, temperature, the pH level, tolerance to byproducts, and so on. So different organisms can coexist if they occupy slightly different niches.
Specializing.
Exactly, specializing in different aspects of the environment. We even see examples of adaptive radiation in microbes, where a single species can evolve into multiple forms that are each specialized for slightly different conditions.
Like what?
Well, there's a classic example with Pseudomonas fluorescens, a bacterium that, in a simple lab setting, can quickly evolve different forms. Some stay in the liquid, some form mats on the surface, some stick to the sides, each exploiting a different microhabitat or niche within the same flask.
Wow, so they divide up the space and resources.
Precisely. Think of it like different birds in a forest specializing in eating different types of seeds or insects at different heights in the trees. It allows more types to coexist.
Okay, that makes sense. Different microbes, different jobs, different preferred conditions. Now, how do fluctuating environmental factors play into all of this during fermentation? Things aren't always stable in there, right?
Not at all. Think about a typical fermentation process, especially like a batch fermentation where you start it and let it run.
Like making sauerkraut.
Exactly. It goes through phases. Initially, microbes might be rapidly growing and consuming easily available nutrients. Then later, those resources start to run out, and maybe waste products build up, changing the pH.
So the conditions change over time.
Right. These ups and downs in conditions like temperature shifts, changes in what food is available, acidity increasing can really impact which microbes thrive at different times. There can be a trade-off.
What kind of trade-off?
Well, between microbes that grow really fast when conditions are good and others that are maybe slower growing but much better at surviving tough times when resources are scarce or conditions are harsh.
The sprinters versus the marathon runners.
That's a great analogy. For example, when nutrients become scarce, you might see an advantage for microbes that are slower growing but better at survival. Or maybe microbes that can do something special, like certain nitrogen-fixing bacteria found in kombucha that can pull nitrogen from the air when it's limited in the tea.
Fascinating. And finally, this idea of community coalescence. That sounds like a microbial melting pot.
Agrees. You could think of it that way. It's basically what happens when two or more established microbial communities mix together because their environments merge or overlap.
Like what in the real world?
Well, it can happen naturally in soil when it's tilled, mixing different layers, or when runoff brings microbes from one place to another. The research even points out, perhaps slightly cheekily, more intimate examples like eating different foods or even kissing.
Laugh slightly. Okay, maybe let's stick to soil for now.
Probably wise. But what's really important scientifically is that the outcome of this mixing isn't always predictable just by looking at how individual species perform on their own.
So you can't just add up the parts.
Not necessarily. The new combined community might be a simple blend of the originals, or it might end up being dominated by one of the original communities, or even by a species that was rare in both starting communities but thrives in the new mixed environment. It depends on which new combination of microbes works best together in the changed conditions.
It's mind-blowing to think about all this intricate biology happening in something as seemingly simple as our food or the soil under our feet. Now, let's try to connect this back to our other topics. Can we see any parallels between what makes these ecosystems work and what makes human teams and collaborations work well?
Absolutely, I think we can. The study on the success of collaboration for sustainable agriculture offers some really valuable insights here. It looked at, I think, 30 examples of collaborative groups across Europe, all working on making agriculture more sustainable in some way. The study tried to figure out what factors contributed to their success.
And how did they even measure success in something like that?
Good question. They defined success in a few ways.
Yeah.
Actually reaching their goals, whether those were social, environmental, or economic goals.
Right.
How long their achievements lasted, so durability.
Makes sense.
And also how well the collaboration itself was accepted by everyone involved and the wider community.
Okay, so a pretty rounded view of success. And what were some of the key things they discovered about what makes these agricultural collaborations actually work?
Well, one really interesting finding, maybe even surprising, was that the things happening within the collaborative group itself were much more important for success than external factors.
Really? More important than things like government policies or market prices?
Apparently, yes. Things like the personalities and skills of the people involved, how the group was organized, how it was managed day to day. those internal dynamics seem to have a bigger impact.
That's actually quite encouraging, isn't it? It suggests that the success of these kinds of initiatives is largely in their own hands.
It does feel that way, yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Were there any trade-offs they noticed between trying to achieve different types of goals? Like, could they do it all?
Yes. They found an interesting balancing act, particularly between achieving social goals and economic goals.
Okay, how so?
Collaborations that really focused successfully on economic benefits tended to do so when the goals were highly relevant to what each individual participant wanted to achieve for their own farm or business. Very practical individual drivers.
Got it. Makes sense.
On the other hand, social goals like building community connections, sharing knowledge, improving relationships, those were more likely to be achieved when the participants weren't quite as directly dependent on that specific issue for their own immediate gain, and maybe when the issue was seen more as a public good that benefited everyone.
So a different kind of motivation drives social success versus purely economic success.
It seems so. Interestingly, though, they didn't see the same kind of trade-off when it came to environmental goals.
Oh.
Yeah, which suggests that working towards a healthier environment could potentially go hand in hand with either strong social outcomes or strong economic outcomes. It wasn't necessarily in either with the environment.
That's also encouraging. So it sounds like it's about finding the right mix of motivations and focusing the group structure accordingly. The study also looked at how these collaborations develop over time, right? It wasn't just about the starting conditions.
Exactly. That was another key point. They found that how the collaboration evolves over time is really crucial. Things that become more important as the collaboration matures include, well, things like how well connected everyone is within the group, the network density, how dedicated the members are, the level of trust they have built up in each other.
Trust seems huge.
Absolutely. And also their ability to handle disagreements constructively, conflict resolution. These factors that develop later on seem to be more critical for long-term success than just the initial reasons why the collaboration was formed in the first place.
So it's like a relationship, it needs tending over time.
That's a good way to put it.
This idea of communication and resolving conflict ties in nicely with that other article we looked at on farm conflict resolution.
Yeah.
What were some of the main communication strategies that article highlighted for successful collaboration?
Yeah, that piece really emphasized some, fundamental but absolutely essential communication skills. Things like active listening.
Not just waiting to talk.
Exactly. Really paying attention to understand not just what the other person is saying, but how they see things, their perspective. Also, communicating clearly and concisely to avoid misunderstandings.
Simple but hard sometimes.
Very true. And paying attention to nonverbal cues, body language, tone of voice, which often say more than words. It even mentioned, interestingly, Pharmanaut's Jeevan AI advisory system as a potential tool that could help farmers communicate and make decisions together more effectively, maybe by providing common data points.
Tech helping communication. And how does the study on integrated crop management, ICM, and farmers group dynamics add to this picture of successful collaboration in agriculture?
Well, that study focused specifically on how groups of farmers adopt integrated crop management, or ICM, practices. And remember, ICM is all about using the best, most location-specific farming techniques to increase production in a sustainable way. It often requires learning new things and working together.
Right, so it's practical application.
Yes. And the study found that having strong group dynamics is absolutely essential for farmers to successfully implement these often complex new practices together.
Okay, so what did they identify as the key elements of these strong group dynamics? What's a good farmer group look like?
They identified several important factors, having clear goals that everyone in the group understands and agrees on.
Shared vision.
A well-defined structure, maybe with clear roles like a leader, a secretary, a treasurer, so things get done.
Organization.
Coordinated ways of working together, group functions, ongoing support and learning opportunities for the members' coaching and development.
Keep learning together.
A strong sense of unity and togetherness, cohesiveness. A positive and supportive atmosphere within the group.
Good vibes.
Yeah. The ability to manage pressure, disagreements, and tensions constructively. An overall feeling among members that the group is actually effective in achieving its goals.
Believing it works.
Right. And interestingly, also an awareness of any sort of hidden agendas or unspoken issues within the group, dealing with the covert stuff too.
Wow, that's quite a list. It sounds like building a really functional team.
It really does.
And we saw a real-world example of this with that Tani Moore farmer group in Arjasa village, didn't we? How did their group dynamics contribute to their success with ICM?
Yeah, the study showed how the Tani Makmur group, precisely because they have many of these positive dynamics, clear goals, good structure, ways of working together, they were able to successfully adopt various ICM practices.
Like what specifically?
Things like choosing the best types of seeds or crop varieties for their area, preparing their seed beds effectively, managing their land and water sustainably. This strong sense of teamwork and shared purpose made it easier for them to learn from each other and implement these new techniques.
And the result?
Well, ultimately, it led to better harvests and more efficient use of their resources like fertilizer and water. The group dynamics directly facilitated the practical success.
It almost sounds like a well-functioning microbial community back in our fermented foods.
Mm.
Everyone has a role. They're interacting, maybe competing a bit, but also cooperating, working towards a common outcome like delicious fermentation. And their interactions drive the overall success and stability.
That's a very insightful connection. It really is analogous, isn't it? The dynamics of interaction, whether microbial or human, seem crucial. And it actually links surprisingly well to that Forbes article we glanced at, the one called The Key Role Food Plays in Building Team Spirit.
Ah, yes, the workplace connection.
Right. It highlighted a Cornell study that found that when employees eat together regularly, like firefighters sharing meals at the firehouse, their work performance actually improves. It emphasized the social glue aspect of shared meals.
So just like sharing a meal can strengthen bonds and performance in a workplace, perhaps having shared goals and working collaboratively, even in the often perceived individualistic world of farming, can be a powerful force for successfully adopting sustainable practices and managing these really complex agricultural systems.
Exactly. I think that's a perfect synthesis. Whether it's microbes cooperating and competing in a jar, farmers working together in a cooperative, or colleagues sharing ideas around a lunch table, the underlying principles of effective interaction, clear communication, maybe shared resources, and a common purpose seem to be universally important for achieving positive, stable, and productive results.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've seen how a move towards conservation agriculture can bring about these really complex shifts in the world of pests and their enemies, creating both new challenges and new opportunities.
A real balancing act.
We've explored the fascinating, constantly evolving microscopic communities driving the fermentations in our foods, governed by principles of ecology and rapid evolution.
A hidden world with big implications.
And we've uncovered how crucial those internal group dynamics, trust, communication, shared goals are for collaborations that aim to make agriculture more sustainable, maybe even more important than the external conditions.
The human element is key.
Absolutely. And this leaves us with a final thought for you, our listener. Consider how the principles that contribute to a stable and thriving microbial community in something like, say, a sourdough starter. This idea of different players with different roles, different niches, all contributing to the health of the whole, might offer valuable lessons for creating more resilient and balanced agricultural ecosystems on a much larger scale.
That's a great connection to ponder. And perhaps flip it around. Think about how the dynamics of a successful group of farmers, their shared goals, their trust in each other, their ability to communicate effectively through challenges, mirror the dynamics of any high-performing team, no matter the field, or maybe even echo the complex interactions needed for a stable, natural ecosystem. What other surprising connections might exist between these seemingly unrelated worlds if we just take the time to really explore and look for those patterns?
It definitely gives you something to ponder, doesn't it? We really encourage you to delve deeper into the specific research we've touched on today, or maybe explore other fascinating studies in sustainable agriculture, food science, or even team dynamics. There's always more to discover when you take a closer look beneath the surface.
Indeed. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and you might just be amazed by the hidden complexities and surprising connections you uncover when you take that deep